Hello everyone and welcome back to the Red Path. My name is Dara and this is Miniatures of the Month. I'm taking a look at various miniatures submitted by our community in the Red Path and Discord. We're going to be highlighting a lot of wonderful miniatures today, so grab yourselves a brew and let's dive into the video. So after the pretty good success of December's Miniatures of the Month pilot show, I've decided to keep this one going for a little while and see if it gains in popularity and keeps the good vibes going. I have picked out a lot of really excellent miniatures to show you folks today, and unfortunately I haven't actually been able to get to everything that was submitted in the January installment since there was actually quite a lot of entries, so apologies if I haven't gotten round to your submission. There was just a lot to choose from here, so I kind of had to do it at random in the end. Now, if you do want to have your miniature submitted for next month, which is going to be February, get your paintbrushes out, get painting something cool, something that's going to wow me, and submit it in the Discord in our Miniatures of the Month submission channel, which is in the hobby section of our Discord. The link is down below. It's pretty self-explanatory. Navigate your way there and pop in the miniature. But we have an awesome showcase of minis here today. I'm going to be talking about all of them, talking about the things that I like, highlighting the best parts of the miniature, and maybe giving a couple of criticisms and suggestions about ways that they might be able to be improved upon. We have so much to talk about, so without further ado, let's get into it. For 2 months in a row, we are kicking off the showcase with the genius mind of Studio Guri, better known as Yale, and this time around he's brought a Primarch to the table. Lionel Johnson, in my opinion, is one of the hardest Space Marine models to paint, but Yale has applied a variety of his signature moves here to ensure that the finished piece captures the intense detail locked within the sculpt. The composition overall is really strong, with rich greens dominating the view, while important features such as the sword, shield and face are picked out in contrasting colors which draw our eye. Yale has used his scratch and stab technique to generate really striking transitional zones of light and shadow across the surface of the armor, which goes a long way in breaking up the monotony of plates of ceramite. This is actually something I'd really like to highlight here, because as painters I think it's something that we don't always consider. A lot of the time we don't think about adding texture to a miniature using paint, often expecting the sculpt to do the heavy lifting in that regard. However, some of the most convincing and striking paint jobs will use complex techniques to transform those plastic surfaces into ones which resemble something entirely different. In this case, Yale's work has created the illusion of indented, bumpy armor, which has seen a great deal of wear and tear. It's food for thought for any of you looking to up your painting game. I do always like to pick out one facet of the miniature which I think could be refined, but it's really hard to be critical of Yale's work here. In this case, the one area that I'm not fully sold on is the face of the lion. Faces are a bit of a pain for any painter, and I'm certainly no master of them by any stretch of the imagination, but I just find this face is slightly lifeless, or maybe a little bit too pale overall. It's still painted incredibly well, there is no doubt about that, but I think maybe it could do with a bit of a reddish or pink tint or glaze, just to give the impression of blood flow and liveliness. It's a very minor criticism, to be honest, and I did struggle with sourcing a point of critique on this miniature. Overall, it is obviously wonderful to see Yale continuously upping his painting game, and this miniature is a gorgeous centerpiece for any collection. Next up, we have a submission from GamesFan, a terrifying reimagining of the Mauler Fiend, which he has dubbed the Crawler Fiend. It is impossible to talk about this piece without commenting on the brilliance of the conversion, and personally I think Games has reinvented the image of what a Mauler Fiend is, making it far more grimdark and suited to the 40k atmosphere when compared to the base model. It is oozing character, and it's like something you would see in Codex artwork. The paintwork, while relatively simple, does a great job of amplifying the conversion by drawing the eye to the unique features of the piece with the clever use of spot colors, notably the use of vibrant pinks, which help break up the monotony of flat black armor panels and pull our attention to the tendrils and cabling. Overall, the paintwork is very clean and clear with good differentiation of textures and components. The gold is somewhat dull and isn't overpowering, ensuring our eye isn't distracted by too many bright features, leaving that OSL to really shine through where it has been applied. On that note, I do really like the placement of the bright pink tone since it conveys an unearthly, strange power running through the creature, adding to that kind of overall demonic theme of the piece. And while I absolutely adore this, there are two aspects that I would refine ever so slightly. Firstly, I don't think this miniature needs a second type of OSL, and the blue glow on the back feels a little bit out of place, mainly because to me there isn't a clear source of illumination. Secondly, I think the black panels could do with just a touch more life to them. Painting black armor, it can be a funny one, and I usually like to depict it in shades of very dark greys complemented by light grey scratching and highlighting. This adds a bit more depth to black armor and can give the impression of texture too. However, these are again minor points of critique for what is essentially an inspired and unique take on a much beloved demon engine. Excellent work, games. Next up, we have a menacing Chaos Knight from Roach. Knights, in my opinion, are one of the most interesting miniatures to paint since they offer you a range of opportunities and blank canvas. They also serve as a really good practice piece for new techniques or refining existing ones that you think need improving upon. Roach's Knight paints an overall grimdark picture here with some subtle details added in which help build the image of a corrupted war engine. Firstly, the spread of colours across the carapace is quite decent. Red and black are two colours which are commonly applied to Chaos Knights, but I like that Roach has worked in iron tones here too. It is suggestive of the wearing away of the previous colour over the ages, leaving the knight with just bare metal showing on the surface. Though I'm not sure if it was intentional, the red shoulder pad, which appears chained to the arm, has a slightly different trim colour to the main body, and to me this reads as a piece of armour taken from a slain foe, perhaps to replace a missing original piece. And this, along with the missing shin armour, it really tells a story to me about the knight, and it comes together with what I mentioned about the iron tones to paint a picture of this kind of war-torn veteran machine. The OSL application, again, it's subtle but it's impactful. Focus mainly on exhaust ports, but particularly notable on the left shin, where the exposed exoskeleton seems to be brimming with uncontained power. This has transitioned beautifully onto the base, where the scorched impact of the knight's foot helps to ground the miniature in this realistic setting. As I mentioned, knights are a fantastic canvas to work with, and I love what Roach has done here. However, I also know that Roach is capable of pushing this further. If I was to make any suggestions, I'd love to see a little bit of freehand on this guy. Maybe lean harder into the battle damaged effects too, something like sponge chipping on the armor surfaces that still have colour. That would make it look as they are also being eroded over time. And it can be easy to get lost in the small details when you're painting a miniature so big. My advice would be always continuously take a step back, put the model down and give it a full look over before moving on to further steps. Overall though, it is another wonderful contribution from Roach, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Next on the bill, we have a new contributor to Miniatures of the Month, Christian L's Master of Executions. It's a lovely little kit bash. I am a big fan of this build. The Obsidious Malix model makes for a really solid skeleton for any sort of semi-generic Chaos character kit bash. And Christian has incorporated elements from the Juggernaut Lord, the Horus Heresy Praetor, and the Khorne Berserker kit to move this away from that standard look and bring us something which is a lot more tied in with the World Eaters Legion. The pose has come out quite natural, and I do particularly enjoy the iron ring hung with skulls, which really helps solidify this model's identity as a master of executions. The paint job is pretty solid, and Christian has gone with the classic red and brass scheme, which sometimes I don't feel like we see a lot of. There's quite a lot of love for the Horus Heresy scheme, myself included in that group, and it is nice to freshen things up with a bit more of an OG look. Christian has done a pretty good job at establishing colour on this miniature, and the bright blue of the cape as well as the grey fur pelt, it helps to break up the red and brass tones across all viewable angles. It is important to have spot colours like this when you're working with rich tones like reds, and I like how this has been executed. The skulls provide a nice highlight point too, and the ashen waste base theme does a good job at contrasting the miniature standing on top of it. If I was to make any suggestions to Christian, it would be to focus on two aspects of this model. Firstly, I think the cape could do with a little bit of a touch-up. It's seeing the effects of a wash patina, which sometimes occurs when a wash pools across flat areas where shadows wouldn't naturally generate, thus leading to areas of darkness which don't always make sense. This can be easily remedied though by either going back over these areas with the initial layer color once the wash has dried, or during the application of the wash, pulling it away from these flatter areas and dragging it into the recess. And finally, while I love the rich bronze tones that Christian has used here, I think they would love just a little spot color of a brighter metallic tone, maybe a bronze mixed with a touch of silver, just to make them pop and distinguish them a little bit more from the red armor. Overall though, it's a good piece, and I love seeing people kit bashing existing miniatures into something new and unique. I can't wait to see more from Christian. We move on to a lovely little entry from Myar next. I chose this one to highlight from Myar's couple of entries because it pretty much immediately jumped out at me for its simple yet incredibly effective aesthetic. While it may just be another World Eater's Terminator, Myar has presented a wonderful paint job which breathes life and story into the miniature, transforming it from an otherwise unremarkable line trooper into a character who is a veteran of countless battles. The dark, gritty tone of this miniature immediately captured me, and Myar focuses on a sepia brown tone to ground the miniature in a grimdark atmosphere, with a lovely spot tone of purpley pink to draw the eye to the miniature's weapon. Additionally, the bare head, it stands out from the armor tone, so our eye is automatically drawn to the two most important features, the head and the weapons. The paintwork is very crisp and the color choice is perfect, but what I want to focus on is Myar's use of weathering. We are seeing multiple different techniques applied to this mini, from chipped to mud to grime, which is adding volume to a piece like this. It helps solidify the image of a seasoned veteran who has slogged through many battlefields, his armor now starting to show wear and tear. One particular aspect that I really like is the weathering on the shoulders, where the iron underneath is starting to show through. I've picked this out because I've never been able to replicate the effect to the level that Myar has here, so when I see it executed this well, I'm equal parts jealous and admiring of it. Finding an element of this miniature to critique is not easy, and I already feel like I've seen Myar improve since their first submission to Miniatures of the Month, so that is awesome to see. If I was to focus on anything, it would be to add a little bit of rust element to the weathering palette. There's wonderful armor chipping going on here, but the metals feel comparatively clean, so I think a little pin wash and something like Track Rust from Ammo Mig would go a long way. Further, rust effects can function as an excellent spot color for the Horus Heresy scheme on World Eaters, since the orange tones contrast heavily with the white and blue, providing another interesting feature for the viewer. Overall though, it is a beautiful piece. Keep up that excellent work, Myar. Following on from that, we have Mark of Khorne's Predator. Mark has made a marriage of two great kits here, the Chaos Predator and the new Deimos Predator. While I am a massive fan of the Deimos silhouette, it lacks a certain chaos element, and Mark has done a fantastic job at bringing that sense of evil back into the miniature by kit bashing on a plethora of chaos iconography, which makes it an unmistakable part of the World Eaters Legion. Mark has woven together solid colour blocking here, a clean application of washes and battle damage which isn't overbearing, to deliver a piece which looks right at home fighting alongside berserkers. The concentration of battle damage towards the front of the tank is very logical, and the mud weathering on the tracks helps to ground our imagination in the reality of this tank's environment. Bronze tones help pull our eye to important features, namely the sponsons, main turret and trophy features. They also break up the large amounts of red, which can tend to dominate on World Eater tanks, and Mark has spaced these bronze touches quite well across the piece, ensuring they aren't overloading in any one area. Overall, it's a really solid piece, which doesn't really surprise me from what I've seen of the rest of Mark's work. It's very in theme with the brutality of his entire force, and while this may be a gunline tank, there is no doubting that it's gotten up close and personal a few times. It just feels like it really belongs in the World Eaters army, which can be difficult to do with battle tanks. And if I was to suggest anything, I think I'd love to see Mark explore some freehand or decals to add a little bit more variety to that red paneling. Something as simple as, we'll say, tally marks for kills or a hastily sketched Khorne icon would really push this miniature to the next level. But as it is, what's not to love? A great submission from Mark. We move on to a titanically sized entry with Shankley's Lord of Skulls. Longtime fans of the channel will know that this miniature has historically not been one of my favorites in the range, so it really means something to say that we're going to be talking about this one on Miniatures of the Month. But there's no questioning that Shankley has created something truly stunning here. This miniature is a towering bastion of Khorne glory, and Shankley's gone particularly hard on this one to ensure that it commands attention when you look at it. In terms of paintwork, what I love about this, and all of Shankley's work to be honest, is their ability to get that red and bronze balance absolutely perfect. This is obviously subjective, but I find that the tones which Shankley puts down for both of these colours is like the epitome of the 40k scheme for World Eaters. The red is rich and it holds shadowy depths while being vibrant in all the right places, and the brass is a nice cold frame within which the red panels feel right at home. The contrasting nature of the brighter brass and deep reds means it's really easy for the eye to move across the miniature, and none of the features become confused. The iron tones, they're nicely darkened and they don't pull too hard while still being distinct, and the blue spot colours, especially on the cannon, are the perfect little detail to break things up. I imagine this must have taken Shankley quite some time to complete, but the payoff is definitely worth it, and this miniature oozes character. Again, it's a tough one to critique, and this may not even really be a criticism as such, but more of a desire. As a lover of all things grimdark, I'm desperate to see a little bit of weathering on this big boy. A focused pass of sponge chipping is honestly probably all it needs, and it would help to add some variation to the armor panels while still retaining that vibrant tone overall. I wouldn't go too crazy with loads of weathering, because the piece doesn't need it, but just a slight little pass would add a drop more character to this in my opinion. But in all honesty, I truly love it. The penultimate entry for this Miniature of the Month episode is Infinity Hammer's Red Butchers. I'm guessing this build is at least partially a third-party kit, because I don't really recognize the frame of the miniatures, but wow, they are menacing. Infinity Hammer has put out 3 pieces here, which truly encompass the terrifying silhouette of heavily armoured warriors of Khorne, and the paint scheme augments that image, taking it to the next level in fact. What I really enjoy about the colours here are the cherry red tones, which somewhat move away from the warmer reds that we normally see. These are a cooler purpley red, which are emphasised by Infinity Hammer's strong use of deep shadows, again furthering that menacing, gloomy atmosphere. The main armor paneling is nicely complemented by the brass tones, which have little touches of verdigris to introduce some slight weathering and provide a colour of interest. I also particularly like the washed out, life drained skin tone of the bare arm, a feature which immediately draws the eye to it, since it contrasts so heavily with the main tones applied. And it all comes together into these grimdark warriors, which are simply right at home as Red Butchers. Overall, they are a great trio of models, and to find a flaw with them is not easy. It's a small note, but it's something which I think would push these guys an extra mile, and it's the addition of some skulls to the pieces. Skulls would add a different texture and tone, which would be nice point colors if placed correctly, and help focus the eye on areas of interest. It wouldn't have to be much, but I think adding that one small feature would add some character to this unit, though it is already brimming with atmosphere. Again, a brilliant entry to the gallery. Capping off this episode of Miniatures of the Month, we have a massive entry from Average Joe Crude Dude, who has submitted a whopping Warhound Titan that has been lovingly kitbashed and chaosified. So much work has gone into this build, and the more you look, the more you're going to see. It is oozing with story and atmosphere, from the world eaters atop the hull to the massive blender bladed shins. Not only that, but Crude Dude has painted this in a way which doesn't overload the viewer with information and has succinctly framed everything using a solid, excellent scheme. The strong greyish white tones show somewhat advanced use of fading and shadowing, nicely broken up by battle damage and iconography, which encompasses the majority of the armor plate. This is then complemented by a mixture of well-developed hazard striping and warm brick red tones overall, giving the armor panel some nice variation. Many of the kitbashed elements are brought into this scheme through the use of identical colouring or the application of contrasting colours to the main tones, such as the mounted ultramarine and glowing eye lenses. and it all comes together to provide us with this epic piece of work which has a lot of story to tell, and as your eye tracks across the miniature, you're going to notice so many subtle details which continuously just make you say wow. Though I do always like to push the artist in a direction by suggesting some changes, I simply don't think I can critique something of this magnitude. Undertaking the task of painting a Titan is one thing, but taking the risk of converting it so extensively is an entirely different challenge. Crew Dude has stunned me with this one, and I think there's really nothing more that I can say other than damn dude, damn. So that about rounds out this episode of Miniatures of the Month. This has been the January installment, and in a couple of weeks we'll have the February episode coming along too. You could be on that one if you want to submit something that you have painted over the course of February and are particularly proud of. If you do want to take part in Miniatures of the Month, hop into our Discord, the link is down below, and find the submissions for Miniatures of the Month channel in the hobby area. I'll be picking out the best of the best from in there, talking about them, giving them a little bit of critique, and highlighting the wonderful work from our community, as always. If you have liked something in particular that you've seen today, why not drop a comment down below as well, and kind of help build that atmosphere of positivity that we love to see on the channel. As always, if you want to support us, liking, commenting, sharing, etc, is the best way of doing it, and letting us know that you like this kind of show. If you want to support us further, all the links to Patreon, etc are down below. Until the next one though folks, I've been Dara, and you've been watching The Red Path, so stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.